Visage is currently one of the most underrated heroes. He's very rarely picked, but when he is picked, his win rate is fantastic. So take a look at this. This is data from Immortal level pubs, and you can see Visage is actually #1 here for the mid lane. Now, if we also include these very low pick hit rate heroes, he's #3, but this is still fantastic, 57% win rate. In the offlane, doesn't do quite as well, but still, that's respectable, 51.5%. And at pro level pubs, he's also doing really, really well. And again, especially doing well in the mid lane. Not quite as well in the offlane, but still successful. Among us mortals, Visage is still doing quite well. In Divine, Ancient, and in Legend, he's got really high win rates. Lower ranks, he falls off a little bit. But if you're a mid lane or an offlane player, Visage is definitely worth learning, and that's what this video is for. So here we're going to talk about everything you need to know about Visage. We're going to talk about his abilities, which are actually quite complex, so we're going to go into a little bit of depth there. We'll talk about skill builds and item builds, talk about how to lane, what the game plan is, and we're going to take a look at an example game where 33 plays offlane Visage. So first of all, let's take a look at the basic stats of Visage. Level 1 stats, nothing too impressive. Stat gain also not great. He is universal, so that's a big plus, but nothing spectacular here. He's got good range, but his mobility is not the highest. 285 is pretty slow. But what Visage lacks as stats, he makes up for in his abilities. So the signature ability obviously is Summon Familiars, which surprisingly summons some Familiars. These little guys do quite a bit of DPS. So at level 1 they have 25 damage, scaling up to 50 and 75 at level 3. And they attack very fast, twice a second. So they can dish out a ton of DPS. They're considered creep heroes. They've got flying movement as well as flying vision. However, the vision is very low, so they're not that great at scouting. They do have 35% magic resistance, but they have 0 armor and fairly low HP, so they're quite squishy. But you can protect them with Gravekeeper's Cloak, which is a passive aura that works on both your hero and your familiars. It doesn't work on any other control units though. And what Gravekeeper's Cloak does is it adds layers of damage reduction. A max of 4 layers, so if you have all 4 layers active, it reduces 32% of all damage at level 1 and 80% at level 4. So with this maxed out, your familiars take barely any damage. They only take 20% of damage from player-based sources. They do, however, take full damage from everything else, from towers, from Roshan, from neutral creeps, from lane creeps, everything that's not a player. For Visage himself, the Gravekeeper's Cloak works a little bit different, in that whenever you take layer-based damage that is 40 or more, you lose 1 layer. But if its damage is less than 40, you don't lose layers, but you also don't have any reduction. Right, so these Eidolons are doing full damage to Visage now, even though he's got 4 layers. And this 40 damage is calculated after reductions, so if I buy a bunch of armor on Visage, then this Enigma with 47 damage is going to be below 40, and therefore do full damage and not remove any Gravekeeper's Cloak stacks. So if you want to keep your familiars alive, it's very important to protect the hero, because as long as the hero has 4 stacks, familiars take hardly any damage. But once the hero has taken some damage, then the familiars become very squishy and die very fast. And so in fights, whenever your Gravekeeper's Cloak count goes low, it's important to protect the familiars, which you can do by dropping them. So this is an ability that you can cast either from the familiar himself or from Visage with his helper ability. If you do the storm from here, just use the closest familiar that can land. And so this does a little bit of damage as well as doing a stun. Just 0.8 seconds at level 1 and then 1.2 seconds. So it's not a bad stun, especially since you have 2. It has a pretty short cooldown, and over 6 seconds the familiar will regen back to full. So this is great for keeping them alive, and also great for stunning enemy heroes and keeping them from escaping, interrupting TPs and things like that. One thing to note about the helper ability is that you cannot cast it when you're silenced. So here I cannot use this, but I can still manually use the ability from the familiar himself. But if the familiar is disabled, then the helper ability also doesn't do anything. While this helper ability is convenient, in some cases you do have to manually drop those birds. Then we've got Grave Chill, which is like the most straightforward ability. It just places a debuff on the enemy, making them slower and also attack slower, and gives a commensurate buff to both Visage and to his familiars as long as they're nearby. With this ability, you want to spam in fights just to get extra DPS and slow people, and of course you also use it to speed up your farming. Then we have Soul Assumption. So whenever a nearby hero or creep hero takes player damage, 100 damage, then you gain 1 charge of Soul Assumption. You can have a maximum of 3 at level 1 and 6 at max level. And these charges determine how much damage Soul Assumption is going to do. Soul Assumption does a ton of damage. Level 1, it does 230 damage with 3 charges, which is a lot for level 1 nuke. This is like more than twice what most level 1 nukes do. Note the damage to normal summons that are not creepers doesn't charge the Soul Assumption here. But if a summon attacks your hero or your familiars or other creep heroes, then you do gain charges. So now let's talk about skill build. So in the mid lane, you don't really want to get Soul Assumption too early most of the time, because it's going to be a 1 versus 1 matchup where it's hard to get all these charges. So typically you want to hold off to get Soul Assumption until maybe something like level 4, level 5, depending on how much you value Gravekeeper's Cloak. You can also go for something like this. And this way we get Grave Chill maxed out ASAP. But oftentimes it's great to just get this 1 level in Soul Assumption at level 5. And this way we can have more kill potential once we actually have our familiars. Typically we max out Grave Chill first because it's our farming spell and it just allows us to get more kill potential. And then Gravekeeper's Cloak is going to max out second. It's very important to get Gravekeeper's Cloak maxed out, so we take the final level in Cloak over the level 10 talent, delaying level 10 talent to level 11. And then eventually we get our levels in Soul Assumption. There are certain lane matchups where you want an early level in Soul Assumption. For example, you're playing against a Bat Rider or a Husker. They're going to be quite aggressive on you. Gravekeeper's Cloak is not going to do much against them, so having Soul Assumption, perhaps even more than 1 level, can be great in the mid lane. And as far as talents go, there's a little bit of give here for the first 3 talents. You typically take all the Grave Chill talents and then the Armor Corruption, but you can also make an argument for these other talents. But level 25, we always go for +1 Familiar. That's just the better talent. For offlane Visage, things look pretty similar. The one big difference is that we start with Soul Assumption most of the time. Since you typically have a 2 versus 2 lane, you can easily get those charges and have quite a bit of kill potential. But most of the time we still want to max out Grave Chill. We take a value point in Gravekeeper's Cloak, probably at level 3 or level 4, and then max out Gravekeeper's Cloak second. If you want to be very aggressive in lane and invest a lot into winning the laning stage, you can get an extra level or 2 in Soul Assumption. But most of the time you're going to max out Grave Chill, or in some rare lanes you max out Gravekeeper's Cloak first. That is a very passive approach, but against certain heroes that just have low number of high damage instances, then Gravekeeper's Cloak can be quite powerful. And everything else is the same as for mid. Now let's talk about item build. So for starting item build, oftentimes you're going to go for 4 branches, Blightstone and Tango. This gives us a lot of DPS, and this is also items that we want to use anyway. Blightstone is going to turn into Solar Crest eventually, and then at least 2 of those branches are going to turn into a wand. So we're not really wasting items here. Stats are of course very powerful in Visage because it's a universal hero. So every branch gives us 2.1 damage. Every circlet would be 4.2. So you can also start with something like this. This is actually slightly stronger than the Blightstone build at level 1, but it's not going to scale as well because you don't really want to use those 2 circlets. You might maybe make like 1 brace or something like that, but we're going to be buying a lot of mid price point items on Visage, so our inventory slots are going to be a little bit limited. So that's why I prefer the Blightstone start. You can also go for the 1+3 start, which is quite powerful against very spammy heroes. So say you're leaning against something like a Bat Rider or a Bristleback. If we didn't start out with a 1, we definitely want to build one, just to clean up our inventory. And then our first item is typically going to be phylactery. But the build-up of phylactery is not the greatest. Like Sage's Mask is a kind of decent item to have, but this diadem is quite expensive. So oftentimes we'll go for something like a crown, which is just a great item, gives us a lot of damage for the laning stage, and it's going to be used later in our solar crest. But this is a bit optional. If you don't want to invest too much in laning stage, you can also skip the crown for now and just go straight for your phylactery. The phylactery is a great item on Visage because it gives us a ton of HP and mana, both of which is nice to have, and also +7 attributes, which is a decent amount of damage on a universal hero. Mana regen is always nice to have. You have Grave Chill and Solar Assumption, which are both single target abilities. Solar Assumption, 4-second cooldown, and Grave Chill max level is 11-second cooldown, but with the level 10 talent, it goes down to 8 seconds. So we can trigger this phylactery and power spell a lot. And with this extra slow, we can just find kills really easily in the early game. So especially if you're having a good game, phylactery is a great starting option. Later on, of course, that 150 damage is not going to be as impressive, and slows also tend to be worse later on in the game when people have more items and abilities to deal with them. So if you're having a bad lane, if your farm is bad, typically it's a good idea to just skip phylactery. Because if you can't hit your timings with that, the item just doesn't feel very good. But whether or not you skip phylactery, we typically want a medallion, just a very efficient damage item for Visage. Also gives you some extra regen, which is quite important because if you're spamming out Grave Chill, and that's going to eat into your mana quite a bit. Then of course medallion works itself into Solar Crest. You want to get boots at some point. Don't rush boots. It's not that important to have boots on Visage. But you probably want it like after phylactery or like after Solar Crest, or maybe between medallion and Solar Crest. However, there's some lanes where you just need movement speed at the start, where you just need to get away from enemies, and then you do get boots considerably earlier. But if you can, we delay boots a little bit. And Solar Crest just works really well on Visage, gives us plus all stats, which we like. Gives us extra mana regen, which we also like. And then of course the active is great. You can put it on enemies to slow them down. You actually have a lot of slow together with phylactery, Solar Crest, and Grave Chill. So stacking slows is very powerful in Dota because they stack additively. So that can be very powerful. And of course we can also use this to buff up our carry. And the final piece of the puzzle for our core items is going to be Drum. Drum works really well in Visage. It gives you strength and int, which is nice, and makes your birds a lot more powerful with the active. It's also a great teamfight item, and Visage really likes to team up with his buddies in the mid game and go take objectives. And Drum is great for that. And then of course Drum works its way eventually into Boots of Bearing. Typically you just keep this as Drum until you used up all the charges. And then once you use up Drum charges, you upgrade the Boots of Bearing, which also frees up some inventory slots. So this is really efficient. And the other boots options are not that attractive on Visage. Like, you could get something like Treads or Mana Boots. This wouldn't be terrible, but they also don't offer tremendous value on Visage. So Boots of Bearing is just very convenient in Visage builds. So those are the core items you will buy in most games. What other items do you want? So first of all, Shard is a strong option. It helps you stay alive a lot longer. Problem, of course, is that while you're in Storm form, you can't move, so the enemy knows where you're going to come out. So this oftentimes only delays your death and doesn't save you, but sometimes delaying is going to be enough. And so Shard is a pretty decent option. Another option that helps with survival and also mobility is the Aghanim Scepter. This gives you the Silent as the Grave ability, which makes you and your birds invisible, and also gives you a flying movement. Doesn't give you flying vision, but it does give you flying movement. And also when you come out of Invis, you have a buff for a short period of time where you do an extra 30% damage on your hero and your birds. So this is great for escaping, for repositioning fights, for initiating. So if there's no other item you urgently need, Aghanim Scepter is usually going to be our follow-up. Another strong option is Vlad's Offering, which just gives a whole bunch of aura things that help Visage and the familiars, help the team. So it's a good item for similar reasons that the drum is a good item. Visage just likes aura items. And if you're not going for Phylactery, you can think about going Vlad as first item instead. It has a pretty good build-up. And it used to be sort of the standard first item on Visage. But then they removed Wraith Pact, and they also made Visage universal. So this has fallen off in popularity, but it is still a viable option. Orchid is also a strong item on Visage, especially if you're dealing with slipper heroes, things like Co-op or Storm Spirit. You don't want to buy 2 of them though, so just 1. And if you go for Orchid, you want to get it fairly early, so probably go for something like Phylactery straight into Orchid, or maybe even just Orchid first item after maybe like a medallion. Because the later you get it, the worse the silence is going to be, because this just allows more time for enemy heroes to get defensive items, you know, your BKBs, Mantas, and so on. And Orchid is especially strong in combination with Aghanim Scepter, because then you can come out of Invis and burst someone down with Orchid and play a bit more of an assassin build rather than the more aura-oriented build. But most of the time, auras are king, and Piper is another example of that. Just a great defensive item for Visage. It gives basically double protection to birds because they benefit directly from the aura and from the barrier, but they're also indirectly, because with Pipe, your hero is going to take less magic damage, which also means you lose your Gravekeeper's Cloak stacks more slowly. So that also helps keep your birds alive. Downside of Pipe, of course, is that it's a purely defensive item and doesn't speed up your farm at all. So if you go for an early Pipe, that will slow down your net worth progression. Most of the time, you'd rather not buy BKB on Visage, but it's still, of course, one of the core items in Dota. And so in many games, you're going to be forced to buy the BKB to keep yourself and your birds alive. Spirit Vessel was for a very brief time a great item on Universal Heroes. Now it's down to +6 to all attributes, but it can still be an option to go for if you're facing up against a hero like an Alchemist or a Huskar or Necro or something, and you just need someone in your team to buy this quickly. Then Visage can do it. You don't really like doing it, but you can do it. Same thing for Lotus Orb. It's just a very strong defensive and supportish kind of item that on mid Visage you don't want to buy that much, but in some games it might be your best option. Similar thing for like Glimmer Cape or Force Staffs. You can buy these on course. It's allowed to buy these support items on course, especially a hero like Visage who's not really a traditional right clicker. But you'd rather not buy these items. Same for Heaven's Halberd, Shiva's Guard, Eon Disc. These are all more defensive items, but in the right kind of games you can buy them. Visage is very flexible with this item build, so you can just buy whatever your team needs. And then for more late game items, more luxury items, AC obviously is a very strong option because you do mostly physical damage, and is another nice aura item. Scythe is like always a good late game option on pretty much any hero. Bloodthorn can be a good option, especially if you're dealing with evasion. And if you haven't gotten Aghanim Scepter yet in the late game, now would be a good time to get it. In some games you may also go for Gleipnir, which gives you a little bit of extra teamfight control. And it's just like a nice slot efficient item. Or you can go for Boots of Travel. Typically you're going to have Boots of Bearing, so Boots of Travel is not an item you buy very often, but it's of course always an option. And if for whatever reason you're not buying Boots of Bearing, maybe because someone else already bought Rum, then you would typically keep your brown boots for quite a while and then eventually upgrade to Boots of Travel. In the off lane, everything stays pretty much the same. It's pretty much the same item build. You may be a little bit more likely to start with a stick or a wand in the off lane. And you also might want to buy a few mangoes because Soul Assumption takes up a lot of mana. So a few mangoes might help you out there. And You're also slightly less likely to buy phylactery just because you have less farm than a mid laner, so you just get your timings a little bit later. But if you have a good game in the off lane, phylactery can still be a great option. And everything else is pretty much exactly the same. I've also added here Guardian Greaves. So if you don't go for Boots of Bearing for whatever reason, Guardian Greaves is also an option. Not certainly an every game kind of item, but sometimes it might be useful. Pretty much you almost always want to get those core items and you just buy whatever the situation demands or whatever your team needs. Now let's take what we learned and apply it to a game of 33 playing Visage. We actually have 3 tournament players here. We've got 33, we've got 9, and then we've got also the biggest 9 fan, also known as Skeeter. And here in this game, beats First Blood to the enemy Slug, which of course is a pretty bad start. At this stage, we've got Soul Assumption, so you want to try to get some sort of kill. So in the offlane, Visage actually is quite strong on 1, just because of the power of Soul Assumption. But then in subsequent levels, you know, level 4, 5, he's actually one of the weakest laners. So ideally you want to use your early game strength to get some kills, but in this case, exactly the opposite occurs. Another kind of in crisis recovery mode. We're going to try to get our levels, we're going to try to not die, and we're going to use our soul assumption freely whenever we've got the charges, because you just need to somehow survive this lane. We're now level 2 Visage against level 3 Slug. Even though the lane has gone pretty poorly, we still do a ton of damage with Grave Chill and Soul Assumption. So in this case, he does get a kill here in this 2 vs 2 exchange. But it costs him a lot of resources, so it's quite low. And he decides here to go for Vlad's. I don't know whether this was his plan all along or whether this is more like a recovery idea. But Vlad's, of course, is an item that's going to offer value throughout the game and going to be good even if you don't have a super early timing. And in a situation like that, where you're behind in kills, it's important not to panic. Even though 33 is 0-2 and the Slug is 3-1, he's actually ahead slightly in net worth. By just buying efficient items, not using too much regen, he's managed to get this slight net worth lead here. He is behind half a level though, which is of course not great. The Slug just hit level 6, and he's going to use his newfound strength along with a gank here just to kill Visage. Nothing you can do about this. This just happened. You just have to accept these kind of deaths. But now we're going to be level 6, and then everything's going to be a lot better. When you're going with Vlad's, you want to go for a Ring of Basilius typically first, or at least the Sage's Mask, to give you some extra mana. And then like Buckler or Blades of Attack are great follow-ups. Mold Mask is not as great. It's the most expensive component, and the other one is just much more efficient. And here in this case, he just gets ganked again. This is a big risk when you just TP in. The enemy gank might still be there. And so now he's truly in recovery mode, because now he's actually behind by quite a bit compared to the Slug, who also has like 5 permanent agi already. It's huge. The thing you do with your familiars is stack camps. Just have to be careful here. It's very easy to lose them against stacked ancients. And look at this. He just spreads out. One here, and one here. And he's going to stack everything. So this is a very high efficiency play. And the lane was not in the safe position anyway. If you're behind like this, you just only defend your tower when the wave is nearby. Otherwise, you just go do other things. Maybe you do jungle camps, or you do stacks. And here they find a free Trinity Protector, you know, why not? The next stack timing is approaching, but this ancient camp is already stacked 3 times, and so yeah, this happens. So be very careful with that. When it's like a double camp, you can probably still get away with it, but triple camp is probably too risky. Even 33 can't do it. Again, stack timing comes up. He does double stack here, and this almost died. He just managed to save it. And it's all just preparation for the Alchemist. While he's doing this, he's just playing this lane defensively. He just does not want to push in this lane, he just wants to exist here and recover. As Visage, you're not great at rotating to other lanes, but you appreciate it if other people rotate into your lane. So here we have this Venomancer and Quap coming in with the smoke, and so he's being a little bit more aggressive, but still trying to stack here. He's very tenacious there. As he's trying to stack here, he actually gets the stack off here, but at the same time, fighting here. This is probably not something that the average player is going to be able to do, but 33 can do it. And in this fight he does get killed, but for his team is still going to be a good fight. Get excellent trade here. And meanwhile, we've got our familiars still staying alive somewhere. When you're not around, you need to be very careful. The familiars are quite squishy because they only have 500 HP. But you can still get something done with them. And here is again preparing for the stack. Let's see if he gets it this time. And alright, he does get it this time. Splitting up the damage between two of those birds. If it just had that used one bird, it would have died there. A little bit earlier, 33 died and lost one of his birds. And he's not resummoning right now. Reason for that is that he's almost level 12, and level 2 birds are so much stronger than level 1 birds, so even in a situation like that we can afford to wait a little bit to resummon, and when you shortly before level 12 go ahead and do it, because level 2 birds, they're just so much better. It's 50 damage over 25. This is so much stronger, especially when fighting against melee heroes, because I forgot to mention it so far in this guide, but melee heroes have an innate damage block, have a 50% chance of blocking 16 damage, which means they block on average 8 damage, which means a level 1 familiar with 25 damage is going to do 1/3 less damage against a melee hero. So level 2 familiars are more than twice as good against melee heroes. In this game he opts for a pipe, which is a very powerful item. In this game there's a lot of magic damage from the enemy team, so it's going to help protect his team a lot, and it's going to delay the Solar Crest. Solar Crest is also a really impressive item here because it's very powerful to put it into Alchemist, but he judges that the pipe is more important here, and here he gets ganked and there's no chance of him surviving, so what he does is just move away with the birds. If instead he tries to like stun with the birds to help save him or something, it's not going to save him. Instead the bird's also going to die, so just save what you can and don't throw your birds after hopeless causes. So ideally the game plan in Visage is to have a great lane, to snowball a little bit, take all the tier 1 towers, and just get a lot done. Here in this game, 33 has had to play a little bit more defensive. He's done a lot of stacking, done a lot of farming for himself. He's gotten his level 2 birds. But now is sort of the time when he wants to play more around his team and group up more with them, which is also why pipe is a good item now. Right now the team is trying to rosh, so he's gonna help out there. When you're roshing, if the linkage is not yet broken, you can break it with Soul Assumption, and then you can use Grave Shield, just do a lot more damage to Roshan and slow him down as well. Visage is a pretty good Roshan. You just have to watch out that the birds don't get targeted by Roshan. In the past, Roshan used to ignore the birds, but now he will hit them if they're the closest target, so make sure that some hero tanks the birds, because the birds die really fast to Roshan. And they even go ahead and find some bonus kills there. So pipe coming in really clutch here, tanking so much damage and making the birds so much tanky. They survive so much longer, but now I'm just going to resummon them. And this mid Earth Spirit is going to try chasing him and is going to get a roll in here and actually kills Visage. That's a pretty nice play from him. But of course, in the whole, still a really good fight for 33's team. After his experiences in the previous fights, 33 decides that he wants to have an Eigenem Shard. And there's a lot of people who can save him, but the enemy team likes to focus him here, so Shard is a great option. He was also actually thinking about a 4-staff earlier, but he decides not to go for that and instead relies on Venomancer. Having a 4-staff It's a pretty good 4-star game as well, but just having these aura items probably more valuable on the whole. As I talked about, the enemy team really likes jumping onto 33 here. So Slark doesn't quite manage his initiation, but if he had, the shard certainly would have come in handy here. And in these fights, it's always important just try to keep up your Gravekeeper Slug stacks. If you can keep away from the enemy, your birds can operate quite freely as long as they're within aura range, which is 900 units. They're hardly ever going to die. And great to fly ahead of enemies when they're fleeing before stunning them. This way they can get this Dawnbreaker eventually. And down she goes. Another great fight. And at this point they're already quite far ahead. 11k is a little bit deceiving because they're going to have an Alchemist who of course is not going to use gold as efficiently as other heroes. But being 12k ahead is still a pretty big lead. You're going high ground like this or hitting any tower, you need to be very aware of fortification. Because towers do full damage to birds, so the cliff can kill them quite quickly if you don't react. So always be aware of that. Here they take a pretty easy tower and now go for even more objectives. Another fortification used, so they just go back. You don't want to overstay your welcome there. Very important not to be too stubborn when trying to go high ground. Now he's going for Solar Crest as the next item. He already has the Blightstone, and it's just a very efficient item to put into Alchemist. Alchemist really likes having movement speed, attack speed, armor, so it's just a perfect item for him. And it's almost like giving this Alchemist an extra slot, pretty much. So it's just super efficient. Now the drum touches have run out. Of course, next item is going to be Boots of Bearing. And they just happen to find a Grim Protector here. So that's a nice kill. And the enemy team were trying to make some sort of play, but it's not really working out. Just gonna BKB TP out, and does get out. This Earth Spirit though, also gonna try it, but there's just a little bit too much damage, so he just barely dies. Don't forget that you can also use Soul Assumption against BKB targets. It does 50% damage, but you know, it's still better than nothing. And now with these kills, they're gonna try and push their luck. And first of all, they're gonna take Roshan, very important. And that's of course gonna be no contest there. So now they're in full control of this game. They're just going to take down all the other towers and get another good fight here. See him trying to microwave from the enemy heroes with his hero, and they're gonna get this Earth Spirit. He has resummon here. Probably wanted to drop and then resummon in that fight, but never really got the chance. So now he's gonna summon Familius again here, and this is gonna be pretty much the final push. So I hope you learned a lot about how to play Visage, and if you want more information on Visage, there's this is going to be the final push here. I hope you learned a lot about Visage, and go play him now in pubs and blah, blah, blah. This is going to be the final push here. So I hope I could so this is going to be the final push here. I hope you learned a lot about Visage in this video. There's still of course a lot of practice you need to do. You need to get like a feel for how the birds work, what is the range of Gravekeeper Slug. That's very important to have that sort of in your mental model. But once you have some familiarity with the hero, he's not really very difficult to play. He's like one of the So this is going to be the final push pretty much of this game. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to learn more about Visage, obviously you need a bit of practice, a lot of things that you just need to get into your muscle memory, and just have a feel for what Gravekeeper Slug aura is, and so on. But if you get some practice on this hero, he can be really powerful and get you quite a bit of MMR. So if you want to see more content about Visage and other like micro heroes, please subscribe to this channel. And if you want to see more content right now, click on the videos on the screen here, and over this viewing, I will see you there.